the NRA released an ad that could best be described as disquieting or generously a thinly veiled call for political and racial violence. And so I want Rich, play the ad. It's with Dana Loesch. Loesch? Dana Loesch. Yeah.
All right.
Play that. I want people to hear it.
We won't hear it on their side, but everybody else will. So here we go.
They use their media to assassinate real news. They use their schools to teach children that their president is another Hitler. They use their movie stars and singers and comedy shows and award shows to repeat their narrative over and over again. And then they use their ex-president to endorse the resistance, all to make them march, make them protest, make them scream racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia, to smash windows, burn cars, shut down interstates and airports, bully and terrorize the law-abiding, until the only option left is for the police to do their jobs and stop the madness. And when that happens, they'll use it as an excuse for their outrage. The only way we stop this, the only way we save our country and our freedom, is to fight this violence of lies with the clenched fist of truth. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Freedom is safe with the NRA.
Fucking spectacular, right? So, like, I want to get some first impressions on this ad because we've all seen it here probably multiple times. And once it, dawned on me that this was not hidden not even SNL skit, right? Like, but a Mad TV circa like 2003 sketch that like had never been seen before on TV. Like, immediately I thought to myself, well, this ad refers to alternative United States of America where leftist extremism is on the rise or in some way ubiquitous. And the only way to stop it is to engage in rampant vigilantism to apparently stop roving gangs of Marxists, but violent Marxists, a lot of warriors or something. But yeah, so I want to get some first thoughts. Richard, what washed across your mind when you first saw that ad?
Oh, well, I've seen a few of her ads, like just coincidentally, and with this one, there's one with her in a leather jacket saying "Moms like me," and that ad was pretty impressive as well. So it's not it's not unusual from the NRA, but it was, I think it was especially calling for violence, not just against, usually they're talking about thugs or violent ruffians in general, but they conflated that with the left a lot more in this ad than in the previous ads, and it seemed to be a lot more about the propaganda angle and made a lot of accusations that I don't think seem founded, but we can dive into that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, we definitely... Is it not unusual? It feels much more blatant than it normally is. Like, this was an obvious call to, like, political and racial violence, was it not?
I feel like
let's not miss the word.
It's appropriately toned for the Trump atmosphere, I think, in that in a country where Trump is president, that's the appropriate NRA at the level for the NRA.
I don't even know
that's
if it's
roughly where
Trump.
I'm
like I feel like that's the appropriate level for the NRA, at least what the NRA has become, right? Like, so it is not what it purports to be, which is this kind of group that's out there just right, as opposed to this violent political arm of the hard right parties in this country. And I say hard right parties in plural because a lot of times they go a lot further than your mainstream Republicans do, and they appeal to a lot of these alt-right, whatever you want to call them. So no, like this is par for the course. I mean, this is literally what I would expect out of the NRA.
Well, I mean,
the NRA it's a violent political organization. Let's call it what it is.
Well, I mean, I struggle to call the NRA like a far right group, and here's why. No,
wait, I'm not calling them a far right group. I'm saying that there are things that they will purport that will go further than your typical Republican. I think they appeal to far right groups, but I don't think they are necessarily a branch of the Richard Spencer.
That's where I'm at. I don't think the NRA is any kind of ideological group as it is right now. I think they purport themselves to be one, to be some sort of like constitutionalist group, but really they're just the lobbying wing of the gun manufacturers. That's all they are. And when they do things like this to appeal to political and racial anxieties in America, it's not because they have any particular. I don't know. They might have particularly political leanings, but this is all about making money because we know what
when it comes to making money, like what's a great way to make money though in this environment, and that is people's political leanings. Like that's like who's typically a member of the NRA.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I know real about it, and a lot of people.
I mean, no, definitely, exactly. Like this appeals to their key demographic buyer, right? Like we know what drives up gun sales. We know how, and they even make a call back to Obama in this ad, right? They call back to the previous president, who did more to sell guns in America than pretty much anything else.
More guns sold under Obama than any previous president, and probably
more guns under hate groups.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Like listening to that rhetoric, they say our president and then their former president.
Yeah.
Like they make this, like they make that really distinct. They're like, these people are not actually Americans. This is like, that's the black guy. He wasn't your president. This virulent racist who's incompetent. This is your president. That black dude? Nah, we don't know him.
There's a very big us versus them mentality in that ad, and of course we have to situate this ad in the aftermath of the Steve Scalise shooting, right? Because I think that it's fair to say that this ad is drawing on that same sort of the same tone that a lot of Fox News has been putting out there, where it's just like, leftist extremists are violent and they're on the rise. Of course, this exists as in stark contrast to the other narrative, which is that leftists are special snowflakes who break in under even the most simple and soft of criticism. But obviously this is their narrative, that leftist extremism is on the rise, and the only thing that's going to stop leftist shooters are going to be right people, people who are on the right who are going to defend America against those sorts of things. Like, I don't think this is.
I know. Just quickly, another thing that jumped out at me was that
it's craven.
It totally dismissed all of the legitimate concerns from any of the groups that they're mentioning. So, like, Black Lives Matter has absolutely no reason to be upset with the police. The police are the only thing standing in between us and total chaos, according to this ad. And so that, when they execute Philando Castile or when they kill another person on the streets, that's just them protecting freedom. And so they have to stand with them.
Stop catching Pokemon.
Yeah. I just gun sales are down. That's what it is. And this, like you just said, with the shooting that happened with Steve Scalise, with everyone coming out and trying to make the horseshoe theory real and pushing on, the fact that leftists are violent extremists using pictures of Antifa, this is speaking to that demographic, the demographic that has more than one gun and is continuing to buy them. I mean, the NRA doesn't represent all gun owners. It represents the gun lobby, as Adair said. That's what they are. I mean, if they represented gun owners, they would be pushing with, 80% of gun owners believe that we should have more responsible background checks?
They used to, too. They used to as well. The NRA, prior to what they became right now, they used to push for sensible gun legislation, expanded background checks. 80+% of NRA members believe in sensible gun regulations. But we know now that they are, again, the lobbying arm of the gun manufacturers, and so they appeal to the hatred that exists in our society to sell guns.
Right, and that's what I saw. I mean, when I immediately saw the ad, one of the first things I did was I wanted to try and find out what gun sales were doing in the past quarter. And from the basic information I could find, gun sales in the U.S. are down. So that's what this is. This is using fear, as they always have, to try and push sales of guns. And I like the fact that, like you guys said, the previous president, and trying to distance himself, they made more money under the previous president than they ever have. And not just because of domestic sales, but keep in mind that a lot of these gun manufacturers also make small arms that we then turn around and sell overseas. So this is an international business.
Of course. I mean, not only that, but we also have to situate in the fact that, they directly reference protesters, right? They are actually appealing to stuff that's going on in the zeitgeist of society. This sort of Antifa action, but not only Antifa, but also just when protesters are blocking the road. Why do you need guns for that?
Because but of course, I mean, the literal ideation behind that is it's easier to shoot people than it is to run them over.
Meanwhile, they're pushing back protest laws to make it illegal for people to run them over with their cars anyway.
Yeah,
right.
So I mean, it's one of those things
because running people over is a legitimate reaction to being stuck in traffic, but stopping traffic because your rights are being systemically abused and people seem to be going on with their lives anyway. That's absurd. That's an overreaction.
Well, it depends. Are they stopping traffic because a white person died? That's your litmus test. That is your litmus test.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it always strikes me as so disingenuous when we have these conversations, whether they be. And so I guess if it was just the NRA, I wouldn't really care, right? Because the NRA, like I said, they're craven. They're craven, and all they're trying to do is sell guns, and that's why they do that by preying on racial and political animosity, playing on these age-old tropes. Like that's why Dana Loesch is in this. Let's be honest, like that's why Dana Loesch is the person who's pushing this, right? You couldn't have a random white man get out there and shill for the NRA and gun lobby the way Dana Loesch does, because as Richard mentioned at the beginning of the episode, she's done these ads that draw on white femininity, white sexuality, the fragile white woman, to push for gun sales, because out of the fear of this other minority criminal who's going to break in, and we have to protect women from criminals, and that's why we have to have guns. The conversation never seems to go to a point where it's like, yeah, but the fact of the matter is, statistically, that's not going to protect them. They're more likely to have it used against them. So perhaps we should actually deal with the structural causes for crime and other things, and not just kind of turn a society into a lawless, gun-wielding wasteland. But again, just going back to what I was saying, that we still have to kowtow to this idea that there is actually leftist extremist violence problem in America, right? That this actually exists. Whenever people report on this, it seems to be entirely anecdotal and entirely based on anomalous events like the Steve Scalise shooter, if we can even call it an ideologically based shooting. That's more, as with more often an issue of, mental illness or whatever, or the fact that there seems to be the willingness amongst some on the left to, espouse the desire to punch proto-fascists. That's just what this entire conversation is about. We're weighing the NRA actively calling for rampant vigilantism from the right, from gun owners against leftists, versus a few people online who are yeah, I would punch a fucking Nazi in the face. This is what is equal in people's eyes, right? This is the horseshoe.
Well, it is equal in people's eyes, but let's kind of dig into that a little bit. The reason why people feel that it's equal is because they can see themselves as the people being punched. And that was one of the reasons why that whole fascist movement did put out those things. They're like, hey, no, we can't just go out dressed in denim, Doc Martens, and be skinheads. People aren't going to take us seriously. That's why you saw the evolution of the Richard Spencers of the world. That's why you saw them start trying to dress more trendy. That's why you saw that, a lot of these proto-fascists look like people out of GQ. And when you do that, when they did that, America could see themselves as that person. Not necessarily that all of them have the same beliefs, but suddenly that becomes a real person. That becomes someone that could have been your neighbor. And so then that violence, any sort of proposed violence against them, you feel is proposed violence against yourself. And so it just becomes this kind of tribalist identity crisis. You're like, well, I don't agree with what he's saying, but he doesn't look like somebody that I've been told is violent. Therefore, any violence against him is violence against me, and I'm just a regular person. So, by that logic, they must hate all white people and must want to attack us all. So that's kind of where that ideology is coming from. It's wrong, but that's why they're able to equate the two.
No, go ahead, John. Sorry.
I didn't have anything to add. I thought that was well put.
Oh no, I mean, I definitely agree. And all I would add is this: I think that the dichotomy that we draw in American politics is a false one, or rather, it obfuscates some of the other dynamics that exist. Right, the left versus the right is what people want to keep playing towards. The far left is exactly the same as the far right. Trump is exactly the same as Corbyn or Bernie Sanders or Le Pen or whatever. When really it seems like the more fruitful discussion, the way things are starting to pair out, and they have been pairing out for a long time, is that there is a dichotomy that's at play in America, American politics, and it's this. It's there are people who are generally in favor and satisfied with the status quo, and those who are not. And those who are in favor of the status quo, that's the center. It's that's what's being defined as this centrist pragmatic position. That's how they define themselves, as the people who are generally in favor of the status quo and largely elite, versus those who are not. And I think that's why it becomes very easy to conflate the left to the right, because all they're seeing is these are both people who don't like the realities of society. They both have deep criticism of society and want to see the establishment upended, and that establishment is me, as opposed to seeing it keep going on to perpetuity. That could just be me.
No, I think that's definitely part of it, because it comes back to, it becomes this kind of, identity politics. It becomes this, I see myself as the victim here, as opposed to the state being the victim, as opposed to people of color being the victim, as opposed to women being the victim, LGBT people being the victim. It becomes this, again, because we live in such an individualistic society where we value our individual selves as opposed to the collective whole. They say, well, oh my gosh, get rid of me. And then that fear is like, they propagate that fear. The NRA helps propagate that fear. The Republican Party helps propagate that fear. The alt-right and other neo-Nazis literally live off their fear. That movement would have died out a long time ago without that kind of fear there to sustain it. With this fear, the more that they see these things, the more and more you're going to start radicalizing the quote-unquote, well, rather the American center as opposed to the quote-unquote center, because they're able to wrap their own identity both politically and socially, as well as just who they see in the mirror, along with those groups that they perceive as being actually attacked, whereas they don't feel that Black folks or LGBTQ folks or trans people or women are actually being attacked.
I mean, that was one of the weirdest parts of that entire ad, right? That like they essentially say the reason you need guns is that people are calling you bad names. They're calling you racist. They're calling you misogynist. They're injecting social justice and politics into all of your favorite video games. Why can't they just let you live in peace? And it's like there seems to be a contingent of people out there who think that racism and sexism, misogyny, and transphobia only exists once you call it those things. Right. They don't, like, you can be all of those things. You can engage in actions that can be that will easily fall in those categories. But it's not until someone says, hey, that's kind of racist. That's when racism manifests itself. That's when it takes form.
Well, I think there's a good section of society for them that is for their reality that basically is how it works, and that they've been able to exist and enjoy the privileges provided by all of those that result out of all of those isms and misogyny and so on and so forth. And as a result, they do feel personally attacked, because we are actually talking about attacking the stabilizing force in their reality. White mediocrity has a long legacy in this country, and a lot of people are where they are and have succeeded or at the places where they are because of the structures like white supremacy, misogyny, so on and so forth, that already exist in this country. And so if you undermine those, you take those away, you are actually attacking their place in society and their stability. And so it's not necessarily an unreasonable reaction, although not necessarily righteous.